The dust kicked up around Maria's boots as she walked through the crowded marketplace in Fallujah. The smell of spices mixed with diesel fuel filled the air, while children ran between the stalls selling bread and vegetables. Maria Rodriguez had been working as a translator for the U.S. military for 8 months now. At 24 years old, she spoke perfect Arabic and English, making her invaluable to the soldiers who needed to communicate with local people. Maria grew up in a small town in Texas, where her grandmother taught her Arabic alongside Spanish and English. Her grandmother had immigrated from Lebanon many years ago, and always said that speaking many languages was like having many keys to different worlds. Maria never imagined those keys would bring her to Iraq. But after college, she felt called to help bridge the gap between two cultures that seemed so far apart. The morning sun was already hot, even though it was only 9 o'clock. Maria walked alongside Captain Johnson and 3 other soldiers as they made their usual rounds through the market. They were checking on local shop owners and making sure everything was peaceful. The mission seemed routine, just like the dozens of others they had completed in recent weeks. "Ask Mr. Hassan if he's seen any unusual activity around his shop," Captain Johnson said quietly to Maria as they approached a small electronics store. The elderly shop owner smiled when he saw Maria approaching. He had grown to trust her over the past few months, appreciating that she treated him with respect and listened carefully to his concerns. Maria translated the captain's question, and Mr. Hassan shook his head. He mentioned that business had been slow lately, but nothing seemed out of the ordinary. As they talked, Maria noticed a young boy watching them from across the street. The boy couldn't have been more than 12 years old, but something about the way he stared made her feel uneasy. "Captain, that boy has been following us for the past 3 blocks," Maria said softly. Captain Johnson glanced over casually, trying not to draw attention to their conversation. The boy quickly looked away and pretended to be interested in a fruit stand. "We'll keep an eye on him," the captain replied. "Let's finish up here and head back to base." As they walked through the narrow streets leading out of the market, Maria felt the hair on the back of her neck stand up. Something didn't feel right. The usual sounds of the marketplace seemed muted, and fewer people were walking around than normal. Even the children who usually ran up to the soldiers asking for candy or small gifts were nowhere to be seen. "This is too quiet," Sergeant Williams muttered as he adjusted his rifle strap. The other soldiers nodded in agreement. They had all learned to trust their instincts in this dangerous environment. Maria was about to suggest they take a different route back to base when she heard a sound that made her blood run cold. It was the distinctive click of a weapon being loaded, coming from somewhere above them. She looked up and saw the barrel of a rifle pointing down from a second-story window. "Sniper!" she shouted, just as the first shot rang out. The bullet hit the wall inches from Captain Johnson's head, sending chunks of concrete flying through the air. All 5 team members dove for cover behind a row of parked cars. More shots followed immediately, coming from multiple directions. They were surrounded. Maria pressed herself against the ground behind an old pickup truck, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it over the gunfire. She had been in dangerous situations before, but never anything like this. The sound of bullets hitting metal and concrete filled the air, along with shouting in Arabic from the attackers. "We need to move," Captain Johnson yelled over the noise. "There's too many of them and we're sitting ducks here." But before anyone could respond, Maria heard the sound she feared most. The whistle of something flying through the air, followed by an explosion that shook the ground beneath them. A grenade had landed just 20 feet away, close enough to shower them with debris but far enough away that nobody was seriously hurt. "They're trying to flush us out into the open," Sergeant Williams called out. "We need backup now." Captain Johnson was already on his radio, calling for immediate assistance. But Maria knew it would take time for help to arrive, and she wasn't sure they had that long. The attackers seemed to know exactly where they were hiding, and the gunfire was getting more accurate with each passing minute. Another grenade exploded, this one even closer than the first. Maria felt pieces of shrapnel hit the truck she was hiding behind. The metal made sharp pinging sounds as the fragment struck. She closed her eyes and tried to control her breathing, remembering the training she had received about staying calm under pressure. "Maria, we need to know what they're saying," Captain Johnson shouted. "Can you hear any of their communications?" Maria listened carefully through the chaos. She could hear several men shouting to each other from different buildings. Most of it was tactical information about positions and movements, but one voice stood out. He was giving orders, telling the others to be patient and wait for the Americans to make a mistake. "There's a leader coordinating them," she called back to the captain. "He's telling them to keep us pinned down and wait for us to run out of ammunition." The situation was getting worse by the minute. Maria counted at least 6 different positions where gunfire was coming from, and it seemed like more attackers were arriving. The sound of footsteps on rooftops suggested that the enemy was moving to surround them completely. Maria thought about her family back home in Texas. Her mother had begged her not to take this job, worried about the danger she would face in Iraq. Her father had been proud of her decision to serve her country, but she knew he was scared too. Now, as bullets flew over her head and explosions shook the ground, she wondered if she would ever see them again. The radio crackled with Captain Johnson's voice as he continued trying to coordinate their rescue. "This is Team Alpha requesting immediate assistance. We are under heavy fire and surrounded. Our position is 2 blocks east of the central marketplace." The response came back filled with static, but Maria could make out enough to understand that help was on the way. However, the estimated arrival time was still 15 minutes away. In a firefight like this, 15 minutes might as well be 15 hours. As another wave of gunfire erupted around them, Maria realized that their survival would depend on more than just waiting for rescue. They would need to fight their way out of this trap, and she would need to be ready to help in whatever way she could. The young woman who had walked into the marketplace that morning as a translator was about to become something she never expected to be, a warrior fighting for her life in the streets of Fallujah. The gunfire intensified as Maria pressed herself deeper behind the rusted pickup truck. Sweat dripped into her eyes, mixing with the dust and debris that filled the air. She could hear Captain Johnson coordinating with his team, their voices tense but controlled. These soldiers had trained for situations like this, but Maria felt completely out of her element. "We can't stay here much longer," Sergeant Williams shouted as another bullet shattered the truck's rear window above their heads. Glass fragments rained down on them like deadly snow. "They're getting closer." Maria listened to the Arabic voices echoing between the buildings. The attackers were indeed moving closer, using the narrow alleyways and rooftops to surround their position. She could hear them communicating about cutting off escape routes and preparing for a final assault. "They're planning something big," she warned the team. The leader just told his men to get ready for a coordinated attack from all sides. Captain Johnson's face was grim as he processed this information. He had been in combat before, but being trapped in an urban environment with limited cover was every soldier's nightmare. The enemy had the advantage of knowing the terrain, and they were using it expertly. "All right, listen up," the captain said, his voice steady despite the chaos around them. "We're going to have to move. There's a building about 50 yards to our east with better cover. We'll go one at a time, providing covering fire for each other." The plan was simple but dangerous. Each person would have to sprint across open ground while the others shot at the enemy positions to keep the attackers' heads down. Maria's stomach churned as she realized she would have to make that terrifying run too. Private Martinez went first. He took a deep breath, gripped his rifle tightly, and burst from behind their cover. The other soldiers immediately opened fire at the windows and rooftops where they had seen muzzle flashes. Martinez ran in a zigzag pattern, just as he had been trained, making himself a harder target to hit. He made it halfway before the enemy responded. Bullets kicked up dust around his feet as he dove behind a concrete barrier. "I'm hit!" he called out, but quickly added, "It's just my shoulder. I can keep going." Sergeant Williams went next, his larger frame making him an easier target. But his experience showed as he moved with purpose, using every piece of cover available. A stack of concrete blocks, an abandoned cart, a low wall, he used them all to break up his run into shorter, safer segments. When it was Maria's turn, her hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold her pistol. She had basic weapons training, but she had never imagined she would need to use it. The distance to the building looked impossibly far, like trying to cross an ocean under enemy fire. "You can do this, Maria," Captain Johnson said, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Keep low, keep moving, and don't look back. We've got you covered." Maria nodded, trying to swallow the fear that seemed to be choking her. She thought about her grandmother's words about being brave in the face of adversity. "Courage isn't the absence of fear," her grandmother had always said. "It's doing what needs to be done despite the fear." She took off running, her legs pumping as hard as they could. The world around her seemed to slow down and speed up at the same time. She could hear the crack of rifles as her teammates provided covering fire, and the angry buzz of bullets passing close to her head. The ground beneath her feet felt unsteady, and every step seemed to take forever. Halfway across, something hit her in the leg. At first she thought she had stumbled, but the burning sensation and the sudden weakness told her she had been shot. She kept running, refusing to let the wound slow her down. The building was so close now, just 20 more yards. Then another impact, this time in her side. The force of it spun her around and nearly knocked her down, but somehow she stayed on her feet. The pain was incredible, like being hit with a red-hot poker, but she forced herself to keep moving. Almost there, she heard someone shout, though she couldn't tell who it was over the ringing in her ears. More bullets found their mark as she covered the final distance. Her arm, her other leg, her back. Each impact felt like being struck by lightning. But somehow, impossibly, she kept running until she collapsed behind the concrete wall of the building. "Medic!" Captain Johnson shouted as he and Sergeant Williams reached her position moments later. But they were still under heavy fire and there was no medic to call. They were on their own. Maria looked down at her body and was shocked by what she saw. Her uniform was torn and soaked with blood from multiple wounds. She tried to count them but kept losing track. There were so many holes in her clothing, so much blood, that it seemed impossible she was still conscious. "How bad is it?" she asked, her voice surprisingly steady. Captain Johnson was already applying pressure to the worst wounds, using strips torn from his own shirt. His face was pale as he worked. "You're going to be okay," he said. But Maria could hear the uncertainty in his voice. The gunfire around them was reaching a crescendo. The attackers had realized that their targets had moved, and were adjusting their positions accordingly. Windows shattered in the building above them, and chunks of concrete fell like rain as bullets struck the walls. "They're massing for a final push," Sergeant Williams observed grimly. "I count at least 15 fighters and they're all moving toward our position." Maria felt her strength ebbing away with each heartbeat. The wounds were worse than she had initially thought, and she was losing blood fast. But her mind remained surprisingly clear, perhaps due to the adrenaline still coursing through her system. "The radio," she whispered to Captain Johnson. "Call in our exact position to whoever is coming to help us. Tell them we're in the blue building with the broken water tank on the roof." The captain nodded and immediately got on the radio, relaying the information to their incoming support. Maria listened to his transmission and felt a small measure of hope. Help was only minutes away now, but she wondered if she had minutes left to spare. As if reading her thoughts, Sergeant Williams knelt beside her and checked her pulse. "Stay with us, Maria. You're tougher than you know." But even as he spoke those encouraging words, Maria could feel herself drifting. The pain was becoming distant and a strange, peaceful feeling was washing over her. She thought about her family again, and about all the things she had wanted to do with her life. The sound of gunfire seemed to be getting farther away, though she knew it was actually getting closer. Her vision was starting to blur around the edges, and breathing was becoming more difficult with each passing moment. "I can hear helicopters," Captain Johnson said suddenly, his voice filled with hope. "They're almost here." Maria tried to smile but wasn't sure if her face was cooperating. The sound of helicopters meant rescue was finally arriving. But as her eyes began to close despite her best efforts to keep them open, she wondered if the help would arrive in time to save her life. The thunderous sound of helicopter rotors filled the air as two Blackhawks descended toward the embattled street. Maria could barely keep her eyes open, but she forced herself to watch as soldiers fast roped down from the aircraft into the chaos below. The cavalry had arrived, but the battle was far from over. Captain Johnson pressed his hands against Maria's worst wounds, trying desperately to slow the bleeding. Her uniform was completely soaked in blood now, and her skin had taken on a pale, grayish color that terrified him. In all his years of military service, he had never seen anyone survive wounds this severe. "Stay with me, Rodriguez," he said firmly, using her last name in the military tradition. "That's an order." Maria managed a weak smile. Even in her fading state, she appreciated his attempt to keep things normal. The taste of copper filled her mouth, and she could feel a disturbing wetness in her chest when she tried to breathe. One of the bullets had definitely hit something vital. The new arrivals moved with deadly precision. These weren't regular army soldiers. Their equipment, tactics, and the way they communicated suggested they were special operations forces. Within minutes, the enemy gunfire began to decrease as the attackers found themselves outmaneuvered and outgunned. Sergeant Williams watched in amazement as the newcomers systematically cleared each enemy position. "Whoever these guys are, they really know what they're doing," he observed. One of the new soldiers approached their position, moving in a low crouch to avoid any remaining sniper fire. He was carrying an advanced medical kit that was far more comprehensive than anything Maria's original team possessed. "I'm a combat medic," he announced as he knelt beside Maria. His nameplate read Patterson, and his calm demeanor immediately inspired confidence. "Let me take a look at what we're dealing with here." Patterson's examination was thorough but gentle. He used small flashlights to check Maria's pupils, felt for pulses in different parts of her body, and carefully examined each wound. His face remained professionally neutral, but Maria could see concern in his eyes. "We need to get her to a trauma center immediately," Patterson told Captain Johnson. "She's lost a lot of blood, and at least 3 of these wounds are life-threatening." As he spoke, Patterson was already working. He inserted an IV line into Maria's arm and began administering fluids to combat the blood loss. He applied specialized bandages to the worst wounds and gave her an injection for pain management. "How many bullets?" Maria asked weakly. Patterson paused in his work to meet her eyes. 14 that I can count. Maybe more. The fact that you're still conscious is remarkable." 14 bullets. The number seemed impossible to Maria. How could a human body absorb that much damage and still function? She thought about all the war movies she had watched, where heroes shrugged off gunshot wounds and kept fighting. The reality was nothing like that. Every part of her body screamed in agony, and even breathing required enormous effort. The sound of the firefight was dying down around them as the special operations team completed their work. The enemy attackers had either been eliminated or had retreated deeper into the city. For the first time in what felt like hours, an eerie quiet settled over the street. "Clear," came the call from multiple directions as the soldiers finished securing the area. A new figure approached their position, clearly the team leader based on how the others deferred to him. He was tall and lean, with the weathered face of someone who had seen many battles. When he spoke to Captain Johnson, his voice carried an authority that came from years of dangerous missions. "We're going to extract your wounded translator immediately," he said. "My helicopter is equipped with advanced medical equipment, and we can have her at the trauma center in Baghdad within 30 minutes. Maria wanted to thank him, but speaking was becoming increasingly difficult. The pain medication was helping, but it was also making her drowsy. She felt herself drifting in and out of consciousness as the team prepared her for transport. The extraction was a carefully orchestrated operation. 2 soldiers created a human shield around Maria as they moved her to the helicopter, while others maintained watch for any remaining threats. The stretcher they used was designed for exactly this kind of emergency medical evacuation. Inside the helicopter, the medical equipment was impressive. It looked more like a flying emergency room than a military aircraft. Patterson continued working on Maria throughout the flight, monitoring her vital signs and adjusting her treatment as needed. "Her blood pressure is dropping," he announced to his team. "We need to pick up the pace." The pilot's voice crackled over the intercom. "ETA to Baghdad Trauma Center is 12 minutes. I've radioed ahead. They're preparing the operating room now." Maria drifted between consciousness and darkness during the flight. Sometimes she was aware of the helicopter's motion and the urgent voices of the medical team working over her. Other times she found herself in strange dreams where she was back home in Texas, sitting in her grandmother's kitchen while the old woman made traditional Lebanese bread. In one particularly vivid moment, she opened her eyes to find Patterson checking her pulse again. "Am I going to make it?" she asked, surprised by how weak her own voice sounded. Patterson met her gaze directly. "You're a fighter," he said simply. "Keep fighting." The helicopter began its descent toward the hospital, and Maria could see the lights of Baghdad spread out below them. It was a sight she had seen many times during her months in Iraq, but tonight it looked different. Tonight those lights represented hope and the possibility of survival. The landing was smooth despite the urgency of the situation. A full medical team was waiting on the hospital's rooftop helipad, complete with a gurney and additional equipment. The transfer from helicopter to hospital was accomplished in less than 30 seconds. As they rushed her into the building, Maria caught a glimpse of the special operations soldier who had led her rescue. He was standing beside the helicopter, watching as she was wheeled away. Even in her weakened state, she could see the concern in his expression. "Will you tell my family?" she called out to him, using what little strength she had left. He nodded solemnly. "Count on it." The hospital's bright fluorescent lights hurt her eyes as they rushed her through the corridors toward the operating room. Doctors and nurses moved around her with practiced efficiency, checking monitors and preparing equipment. Their faces were serious but determined. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, the trauma surgeon, appeared beside her gurney. "Maria, I'm Dr. Mitchell. We're going to take very good care of you. 14 bullet wounds is serious, but we've handled worse. You're in good hands now." As they prepared to move her into the operating room, Maria felt a strange sense of peace wash over her. She had survived the attack, survived the helicopter ride, and now she was in the hands of skilled medical professionals. The odds were still against her, but she had made it this far through sheer determination and the heroic efforts of others. The last thing she saw before the anesthesia took effect was Dr. Mitchell's confident smile. "See you on the other side," the doctor said softly. As consciousness faded, Maria realized that her story was far from over. This was not an ending, but a beginning, the start of a long and difficult journey back to life. The operating room was a symphony of controlled chaos. Dr. Sarah Mitchell and her team of 6 medical professionals worked with the precision of a well-rehearsed orchestra, each person knowing exactly what to do without needing to be told. The electronic monitors beeped steadily, tracking Maria's vital signs as the surgeons began the delicate process of saving her life. "Blood pressure is stabilizing," announced Dr. Chen, the anesthesiologist, as he monitored Maria's condition. "But we need to move fast. She's lost almost 40% of her blood volume." Dr. Mitchell examined the wound systematically, starting with the most life-threatening injuries. The bullet that had entered Maria's chest had missed her heart by less than an inch, but it had collapsed her left lung and damaged several blood vessels. This would be the most critical repair. "Suction," Dr. Mitchell called out as she worked to clear the chest cavity. "I need better visibility here." Nurse Thompson, who had assisted in hundreds of trauma surgeries, anticipated the doctor's needs perfectly. She had already prepared the instruments that would be required for thoracic surgery, and her steady hands never wavered despite the severity of the case. The surgery stretched on for hours. Each bullet wound presented its own unique challenge. The one in Maria's abdomen had perforated her small intestine in 2 places, requiring careful repair to prevent infection. Another had shattered part of her left femur, necessitating the insertion of a metal rod to stabilize the bone. "This is incredible," murmured Dr. Rodriguez, a younger surgeon who was assisting with the operation. "Look at the trajectory of this bullet." He pointed to an X-ray displayed on a monitor. "It missed her spinal cord by millimeters." Dr. Mitchell nodded grimly. "She's either the luckiest or unluckiest person alive. 14 direct hits, but most of them missed vital organs by fractions of an inch." As the hours passed, the surgical team worked methodically through each injury. The bullet fragments were carefully removed, damaged blood vessels were repaired, and torn muscles were sutured back together. It was painstaking work that required absolute precision. Meanwhile, in the hospital's waiting area, Captain Johnson and Sergeant Williams sat in uncomfortable plastic chairs, still wearing their dust-covered uniforms. They had refused to leave until they knew Maria's condition, despite being exhausted from their own ordeal. "She saved our lives," Captain Johnson said quietly. "If she hadn't spotted that sniper, we would have walked right into that ambush." Sergeant Williams nodded. "She's got more courage than most soldiers I've served with, running across that street under fire even after she was hit. That took guts." A military chaplain approached them, offering support and updates when available. Father Mackenzie had counseled many soldiers and their families through difficult times, and he understood the bond that forms between people who have faced danger together. "Any word on her family?" Captain Johnson asked. "They've been notified," Father Mackenzie replied. "Her parents and younger brother are flying in from Texas. They should arrive tomorrow morning." Back in the operating room, Dr. Mitchell was working on one of the more complex wounds. The bullet had entered Maria's right shoulder and traveled down through her arm, fracturing the humerus and damaging several nerves. "We might be looking at partial paralysis in this arm," she told her team. "The nerve damage is extensive." Dr. Peterson, an orthopedic specialist who had been called in to consult, examined the injury closely. "There's a chance we can repair some of the nerve function, but it will require additional surgeries down the line." As dawn broke over Baghdad, the surgical team was still working. Maria had been on the operating table for nearly 8 hours, and the toll was showing on everyone involved. But Dr. Mitchell's determination never wavered. She had taken an oath to save lives, and she was not going to give up on this young woman, who had already shown such incredible will to survive. Last, bullet fragment, announced Dr. Chen as he used a tiny probe to locate a piece of shrapnel near Maria's kidney. This one's tricky. It's very close to the renal artery. The room fell silent except for the steady beeping of monitors as Dr. Mitchell performed the most delicate part of the entire surgery. One wrong move could sever the artery and cause massive internal bleeding. Got it, she said finally, holding up a small, twisted piece of metal. That's number 14. The team allowed themselves a moment of relief, but the surgery wasn't over yet. Each wound site needed to be carefully cleaned and closed, and Maria's body needed to be stabilized for the long recovery ahead. Vitals are holding steady, Dr. Chen reported. Blood pressure is acceptable and her oxygen levels are improving. As they began the final stages of the operation, Dr. Mitchell reflected on the unusual circumstances that had brought Maria to her table. In her 15 years of trauma surgery, she had never seen someone survive this many gunshot wounds. The human body's capacity for endurance never ceased to amaze her. She's going to need extensive rehabilitation, she told the team as they prepared to close the final incision. Physical therapy, possibly psychiatric counseling for PTSD, and multiple follow-up surgeries. But she's alive, and that's more than anyone had a right to expect. The operation concluded just after sunrise. Maria was transferred to the intensive care unit, where she would remain under constant monitoring for the next several days. Her body was covered in bandages and connected to numerous machines, but her vital signs were stable. Dr. Mitchell stepped out of the operating room, exhausted but satisfied. She had done everything medically possible to save Maria's life. Now it was up to the young woman's own strength and determination to complete the healing process. Captain Johnson and Sergeant Williams were still in the waiting room, dozing fitfully in their chairs. Dr. Mitchell approached them with a tired but genuine smile. She made it through surgery, she announced. It was touch and go for a while, but she's stable now. Both soldiers stood up immediately, relief evident on their faces. Will she be okay? Captain Johnson asked. Dr. Mitchell chose her words carefully. She has a long road ahead of her. There will be challenges, both physical and emotional, but she's alive. And given what she went through, that's nothing short of miraculous. As the doctor walked away to finally get some rest, Captain Johnson said a silent prayer of gratitude. Maria Rodriguez had not only survived one of the most brutal attacks he had ever witnessed, but she had emerged from 8 hours of surgery with her life intact. The real test, however, was just beginning. Recovery from 14 bullet wounds would require strength, determination, and support from everyone around her. But if anyone could overcome such odds, it was the brave young translator who had risked everything to serve her country in a foreign land. In the ICU, surrounded by the soft beeping of monitors and the gentle whoosh of ventilators, Maria began the slow journey back to consciousness and the long road to recovery that lay ahead. 3 days passed in a blur of medication, monitors, and medical procedures. Maria drifted in and out of consciousness, her body fighting to heal from the tremendous trauma it had endured. The ICU was quiet except for the constant electronic beeping that monitored her vital signs and the soft voices of nurses checking on her throughout the day and night. On the morning of the 4th day, Maria's eyes finally opened with true awareness. The first thing she saw was her mother's face, etched with worry lines that hadn't been there before. Carmen Rodriguez had flown halfway around the world to be at her daughter's bedside, and she hadn't left the hospital since arriving. Mija, her mother whispered, using the Spanish term of endearment she had called Maria since childhood. You're awake. Maria tried to speak but found her throat too dry and painful. A nurse quickly appeared with ice chips and helped her wet her lips. The simple act of swallowing was more difficult than Maria remembered, but the cool water felt wonderful against her parched throat. How long? Maria finally managed to ask, her voice barely above a whisper. 4 days since surgery, her mother replied, gently stroking Maria's hair. Your father and brother are here too. They went to get coffee, but they'll be back soon. As her awareness increased, Maria began to take stock of her condition. Her entire body felt like it was wrapped in tight bandages, and she could see IV lines running into both arms. When she tried to move her right arm, sharp pain shot through her shoulder and she realized that her mobility was severely limited. Dr. Mitchell appeared at her bedside, her professional smile warm but honest. "Welcome back to the land of the living, Maria. How are you feeling?" "Like I was hit by a truck," Maria replied, attempting a weak smile. "Or maybe 14 trucks." The doctor appreciated her patient's sense of humor, which she considered a good sign for recovery. "That's actually not far from the truth. You've been through quite an ordeal, but you're healing remarkably well considering the extent of your injuries." Over the next hour, Dr. Mitchell explained Maria's condition in detail. The chest wound had healed cleanly, and her lung was functioning normally again. The abdominal injuries had been repaired successfully with no signs of infection. However, the damage to her right arm and shoulder was more concerning. "We had to repair several nerves, and there's still significant swelling," the doctor explained. "It's too early to know how much function you'll regain in that arm. Physical therapy will be crucial, but we won't know the full extent of the damage for several weeks." Maria absorbed this information quietly. She had always been an active person who enjoyed hiking and rock climbing. The thought of permanent disability was frightening, but she was grateful to be alive. Her father and brother arrived with coffee and immediately rushed to her bedside. Eduardo Rodriguez, a strong man who rarely showed emotion, had tears in his eyes as he gently kissed his daughter's forehead. "We thought we lost you, mija," he said softly. "When the military representatives came to our house, your mother fainted. We didn't know if you were alive or dead." Her younger brother, Carlos, only 19 years old, stood awkwardly by the bed. Maria could see that her injuries had shaken him badly. He kept staring at all the medical equipment surrounding her bed, as if he couldn't believe his sister was connected to so many machines. "I'm okay." "Carlos," Maria said, reaching out with her good hand to touch his arm. "It's going to take more than a few bullets to get rid of me." That afternoon, Maria received an unexpected visitor. A tall man in civilian clothes entered her room, carrying a small bouquet of flowers and looking somewhat out of place in the hospital setting. It took her a moment to recognize him as the special operations soldier who had led her rescue. "I hope you don't mind the intrusion," he said, setting the flowers on her bedside table. "I'm Commander Jake Morrison. I wanted to check on how you were doing." Maria tried to sit up straighter in her bed, but Morrison quickly gestured for her to stay comfortable. "Please don't strain yourself. I can only stay a few minutes, but I wanted you to know that what you did out there was remarkable." "I didn't do anything special," Maria protested. "I was just trying to survive." Commander Morrison shook his head. "You warned your team about the sniper, potentially saving their lives. Then you ran across 50 yards of open ground under heavy fire to reach safety. That's not survival instinct. That's courage." He went on to explain that the attack had been carefully planned by insurgents who had been watching the team's patrol patterns for weeks. The ambush site had been chosen specifically because it offered multiple firing positions and limited escape routes. "If you hadn't spotted that first sniper when you did, your entire team would have walked into a kill zone with no advance warning," Morrison said. "Your quick thinking gave them the few seconds they needed to take cover." Maria felt overwhelmed by his words. She had been so focused on her own injuries and recovery that she hadn't fully considered how her actions might have affected others. "How are Captain Johnson and the rest of the team?" she asked. "All safe, thanks to you," Morrison replied. "Captain Johnson has requested to visit you personally once you're feeling up to it." After Commander Morrison left, Maria's family gathered around her bed for a quiet dinner together. The hospital food was bland, but being surrounded by her loved ones made everything taste better. Her mother had brought some homemade cookies from Texas, carefully packed and transported halfway around the world. As evening approached, Maria noticed that her mother seemed unusually quiet. Carmen Rodriguez had always been a talker, filling silences with stories and observations about everything around her. But tonight she sat quietly beside the bed, holding Maria's hand and occasionally wiping away tears. "Mama, what's wrong?" Maria asked gently. Her mother took a deep breath before answering. "When the military officers came to our house, they said you had been seriously wounded in an attack. They couldn't tell us if you would survive. For 3 days we didn't know if our daughter was alive or dead." The weight of what her family had endured hit Maria hard. She had been so focused on her own struggle to survive that she hadn't fully considered the anguish her loved ones had experienced. Kept thinking about all the things I never told. You, her mother continued. How proud I am of the woman you've become. How brave you are for wanting to help bring peace between different peoples. I was so scared I would never get the chance to say those things. Maria squeezed her mother's hand with what little strength she had. I'm here now, Mama, and I'm not going anywhere. That night, as her family finally agreed to get some rest in the hotel room the military had arranged for them, Maria lay awake thinking about everything that had happened. The attack in Fallujah felt like a lifetime ago, even though it had been less than a week. She thought about the choice she had made to come to Iraq in the first place. Her college professors had recommended her for the translator position, calling it an opportunity to make a real difference in the world. At the time, it had seemed like an adventure, a chance to use her language skills to help bridge cultural divides. Now, lying in a hospital bed with 14 bullet wounds, she wondered if she would make the same choice again. The physical pain was manageable with medication, but the emotional impact was just beginning to hit her. She had seen death up close, had felt the terror of being hunted by people who wanted to kill her simply because of the uniform she wore and the country she represented. Dr. Mitchell made her evening rounds and stopped to check on Maria's progress. The doctor had become more than just a medical professional. She had become a source of comfort and hope during the darkest moments. How's the pain level tonight? Dr. Mitchell asked as she checked the various monitors. Manageable, Maria replied, but I keep thinking about what happens next. Will I be able to work again? Will I be able to live a normal life? Dr. Mitchell sat down in the chair beside the bed, giving Maria her full attention. Recovery from this kind of trauma isn't just physical, she said honestly. You're going to face challenges that you can't even imagine right now. But I've seen people overcome incredible odds. The human spirit is remarkably resilient. She went on to explain that Maria would likely experience post-traumatic stress symptoms, nightmares, anxiety, difficulty concentrating. These were normal responses to abnormal experiences, and there were effective treatments available. The most important thing right now is to focus on healing, both inside and out, Dr. Mitchell said. Take it one day at a time and don't try to make all the big decisions while you're still recovering. As the doctor left for the night, Maria realized that her journey was far from over. The surgery had saved her life, but the real work of recovery was just beginning. She would need to rebuild not just her physical strength, but her emotional resilience as well. 2 days later, Captain Johnson finally got permission to visit. He entered Maria's room looking uncomfortable in his dress uniform, carrying a small American flag that had been folded with military precision. This flag flew over our base in Fallujah, he said, presenting it to her formally. I wanted you to have it, with the gratitude of everyone who served with you. Maria accepted the flag with trembling hands, overwhelmed by the gesture. I was just doing my job, sir. No, Captain Johnson said firmly. You went above and beyond. You put yourself at risk to warn us about that sniper, and then you showed incredible courage under fire. That's not just doing a job. That's heroism. He went on to tell her that the military was recommending her for a Purple Heart, an honor given to service members wounded in combat. The idea seemed surreal to Maria. She had never thought of herself as a soldier, just as someone trying to help. What will happen to me now? She asked. I mean, after I recover? Captain Johnson's expression grew serious. That's up to you. The military will take care of all your medical expenses and provide disability compensation for your injuries. You could return to civilian life if that's what you want. And if I wanted to continue serving, there would be options, he said carefully. Your language skills are valuable, and your experience would be invaluable in training other translators. But Maria, you've already given more than anyone has a right to ask. After he left, Maria stared at the folded flag for a long time. She thought about her grandmother's words about having keys to different worlds through language. Those keys had led her to Iraq, where she had experienced both the worst and best of humanity. The attack had shown her the darkest side of human nature, the willingness to kill and maim in pursuit of political goals. But the response had shown her something else entirely, the courage of soldiers who risked their lives to save a wounded comrade, the skill of doctors who worked through the night to repair a broken body, and the love of a family who traveled thousands of miles to be at a bedside. As she drifted off to sleep that night, Maria made a decision. 6 months later, Maria stood in front of a mirror in her physical therapy clinic in San Antonio, Texas. The reflection looking back at her was different from the young woman who had walked through the markets of Fallujah. Scars marked her arms and torso like a roadmap of survival, and her right shoulder would never have the same range of motion it once did, but her eyes held a strength that hadn't been there before. "Looking good, Rodriguez," said her physical therapist, Jake Martinez, as he watched her complete a series of arm exercises. "Your progress has been remarkable. 6 months ago, we weren't sure you'd regain 50% function in that arm." Maria flexed her fingers, still amazed that they responded to her commands. The nerve damage had been severe, but months of dedicated therapy had helped her regain most of the feeling and movement. She would never be able to rock climb again, but she could write, type, and perform most daily activities without assistance. "The mind is a powerful thing," she replied, toweling off the sweat from her workout. "When you really want something, your body finds a way to adapt." The physical recovery had been challenging, but it was the emotional healing that had surprised her most. The nightmares had been constant at first, reliving the attack, hearing the sound of gunfire, feeling the impact of bullets. But with the help of a skilled counselor who specialized in combat trauma, she had learned to process those experiences in a healthy way. Dr. Rebecca Shaw, her therapist, had explained that trauma doesn't just disappear, it becomes part of your story, part of what shapes you into the person you're meant to become. The key was learning to integrate those experiences without letting them control your future. "You're not the same person who went to Iraq," Dr. Shaw had told her during one of their sessions. "And that's not necessarily a bad thing. Trauma can break people, but it can also reveal strength they never knew they had." Maria's family had been her foundation throughout the recovery process. Her mother had taken a leave of absence from her job to help with Maria's care during the first few months. Her father had converted their garage into a temporary physical therapy space, so Maria could work on her exercises at home. And Carlos had appointed himself as her personal cheerleader, celebrating every small milestone in her recovery. But perhaps the most meaningful support had come from an unexpected source. Commander Morrison, the SEAL who had led her rescue, had stayed in touch throughout her recovery. What had started as professional concern had evolved into genuine friendship. "I wanted to check on you," had become a regular phone call that Maria looked forward to each week. Morrison had seen many wounded warriors during his career, and he understood both the visible and invisible wounds that combat could inflict. "The thing about surviving something like what you went through," he had told her during one of their conversations, "is that it changes your perspective on everything. Little problems that used to seem huge suddenly feel manageable. You realize what really matters." That perspective shift had led Maria to a new career path. Instead of returning to translation work, she had decided to become a counselor specializing in helping other trauma survivors. She was currently enrolled in a master's program in counseling psychology, using her GI Bill benefits to fund her education. "I want to help other people find their way through the darkness," she had explained to her family when she announced her decision. "If my experience can help even one person heal, then everything I went through will have had meaning." Her professors were impressed by the insight and empathy she brought to her studies. Having experienced trauma firsthand gave her a unique understanding of what her future clients would be facing. She didn't just study PTSD from textbooks. She had lived it, fought through it, and emerged stronger on the other side. Today marked a special milestone. Maria was attending her first Purple Heart ceremony since receiving her own medal, but this time she wasn't the recipient. She was there to support a young soldier named David Chen, who had been wounded in Afghanistan. David was 19 years old, barely older than her brother Carlos. He had lost his left leg below the knee when his vehicle hit an improvised explosive device. As Maria watched him receive his medal, she saw her own fear and uncertainty reflected in his eyes. After the ceremony, she approached David and his family. "Congratulations on your medal," she said simply, "and thank you for your service." David looked up at her from his wheelchair, his expression a mixture of anger and despair. "Thanks, I guess, though I'm not sure what I'm supposed to do with this thing." Maria understood that feeling completely. The Purple Heart was an honor, but it also represented loss, of innocence, of physical capability, of the life you had planned before everything changed. "When I first got mine, I felt the same way," she said, pulling up a chair to sit beside him. "I kept thinking about everything I couldn't do anymore instead of focusing on what I still could do." How do you get past that? David asked, genuine curiosity replacing some of the bitterness in his voice. Maria smiled. One day at a time, and by finding new ways to serve. Your military career might be over, but your service to others doesn't have to be. She told him about her own journey, the long months of physical therapy, the struggle with nightmares and anxiety, the process of discovering new dreams to replace the ones that were no longer possible. The bullets took some things from me, she said, but they also gave me something I didn't expect, clarity about what really matters. Every day I wake up is a gift. Every person I can help is a victory. David's parents listened intently as Maria spoke. She could see hope beginning to replace the despair in their eyes. Their son's injury had devastated the entire family, but hearing from someone who had walked a similar path gave them reason to believe that healing was possible. Before leaving the ceremony, Maria gave David her card with her personal phone number written on the back. "Call me when you're ready to talk," she said. "Day or night. I've been where you are and I know the way forward." As she drove home that evening, Maria reflected on how far she had come. The scared young woman who had been shot 14 times in a Fallujah street seemed like a different person entirely. That woman had been broken by violence and trauma. This woman had been forged by it. Her phone rang as she pulled into her driveway. The caller ID showed Commander Morrison's number. "How did the ceremony go?" he asked without preamble. "Good," Maria replied. "I think I was able to help a young soldier who's struggling with his injuries. It felt good to give back. That's what I like to hear. You know, I've been thinking about something. My unit is starting a new program to help train military translators. We need someone with real-world experience to help develop the curriculum. Interested?" Maria paused, considering the offer. It would mean returning to the world of military service, at least in an advisory capacity. The thought was both exciting and terrifying. What would it involve? She asked. Teaching cultural awareness, stress management, survival skills, all the things you learned the hard way. Help us prepare the next generation of translators so they don't have to go in as unprepared as you did. The offer was tempting. It would allow her to combine her language skills, her combat experience, and her growing expertise in trauma counseling into something meaningful. "Can I think about it?" she asked. "Of course. But Maria, I want you to know Sumt wasn't ready to give up on her mission to build bridges between cultures. The bullets had wounded her body, but they hadn't broken her spirit. She would recover, she would heal, and she would find a way to continue serving, perhaps in a different capacity, but with the same commitment to peace and understanding that had brought her to Iraq in the first place."